Welcome back to day 30 of 31 Monsters in 31 Days. I cannot believe we are here. Let's find out who we're making today. We are making a werewolf. All right, let's get started. While we're sketching out the plan and making the basic blob shape that all the monsters in this series are built off of, I'm going to give you a bit of a history of werewolves and why I included them on my monster list. If you want to see slower step-by-step instructions on how to make this basic blob form, check out this video. For details on how I do my paper mache, check out this video. Both are linked in the description. Folklore about humans turning into wolves dates all the way back to about 2100 BCE in the Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamia. The titular hero of the poem rejected a potential lover because she had turned her ex into a wolf. In ancient Greek mythology, Zeus turned some folks into wolves as one of his weird godly punishments. The saga of the Volsungs from Nordic mythology tells a story of a father and a son who found wolf pelts that, when worn, would turn them into wolves. We've been obsessed with the idea of men turning into wolves for a long time. In modern lore, werewolves aren't ordinary wolves, but often a half-man, half-wolf creature that is bigger, stronger, and more violent than an actual wolf. Like so many of our popular monsters today, werewolf lore as we know it comes from a Universal Pictures monster movie. The 1941 film The Wolfman, starring Lon Chaney Jr., popularized the ideas that werewolves transform during a full moon, can be killed by a silver bullet, and can pass on the curse via a bite. Since then, werewolves have become a staple of supernatural and fantasy media. Symbolically, they represent the sometimes thin boundary between man and beast. Metaphorically, they can represent transformation and hidden monstrosity within. Unlike other popular monsters, werewolves are often afraid of what they might do when they transform, or might feel deep regret for what they have done in their monster form. Modern storytellers have often pitted the bestial, uncontrolled werewolves against the more restrained and sophisticated vampires. The most well-known example of this that I can think of is, of course, the Twilight books and movies, but there's tons of other examples. The vampire versus werewolf motif is popular in media because it works as a metaphor for control versus chaos, civilization versus nature, and reason versus passion. I had to include werewolves on my monster list because they continue to be one of the most enduring and adaptable symbols of transformation in storytelling. My first step to turn my basic blob shape into a werewolf is to use this section of an egg carton to make him a little snout. As you saw in our initial sketch, I want this wolfman to have his jaws open, and we're going to be able to see his teeth. Before I can make his teeth though, I need to make his jaws. As I said, I'm starting with this egg carton, and I'm folding up a wad of paper into this triangular shape and using some masking tape to form a little snout. I'm covering that inside and out with some paper mache to give the egg carton some stability. When that paper mache is dry, I'm using my craft knife to cut the egg carton into a top and bottom jaw. Now I can figure out how big I need to make the teeth. I'm sculpting these with oven baked clay today because I don't want to wait for air dry clay to dry, but you could do this with air dry clay too. I'm making 4 little fangs and then some smaller doggy dentures. I'm also making him a big lolling tongue. We'll bake all these in the oven to cure. When the teeth and tongue are baked, we're ready to install them into our egg carton wolf jaws. I'm hot gluing the denture bit in place, then adding his wolf fangs on either side. I'm going to use this red paper to make him some gums. I like using the colored paper for this because I don't like trying to paint around little teeth, so I can use the red paper so I don't have to paint his gums red later. This paper is a bit thick and can be trickier to work with, so after ripping off the edges, I'm scrunching and unscrunching the paper a few times. This makes it a little softer and easier to work with. I'm using teeny tiny scraps of paper to wrap around his teeth to make his gums. I'm using my little tool there to try to push the paper into all the creases around his teeth. I didn't film it, but off camera I used the red paper to coat the inside of his jaws too. At this point, I'm also painting his tongue pink. The jaws are dry now. I'm going to be sticking them to the blob like this, but I want to paint the inside of his mouth area black. I might have squeezed a bit too much paint onto my finger, which is why like half the blob is black. When the paint has dried, I'm hot gluing the tongue into place. I'm using a bit of this black tape to cover up the base of the tongue there. The jaws are going to fit around the tongue like this.
I'm sticking on the lower jaw first. I'm using a bit of hot glue and some tape to stick it on there. Then I figured I should probably coat everything in resin now before I make it hard on myself to get in there. So I'm coating the tongue and the inside of the lower jaw in UV resin. This will give the inside of his mouth a nice wet and slobbery look. I fully cured that resin. Then I did the upper jaw off camera before sticking that onto his face. I've cut some nice big wolf ear shapes out of cereal box. I'm cutting a slit into the bottom of each one to act as a dart, then overlapping the legs of the dart with some glue to give that flat cardboard some 3D shape. I'm using a bead of hot glue around the edge of each ear to beef it up a little bit. When the glue has set, I'm sticking the ears onto his head. I'm using some aluminum foil and masking tape to bulk up and smooth out the area behind the ears. Then of course we have to cover all of that tape in paper mache. With all that covered, we can go ahead and make our wolf some lips. This is a bit of a paper grocery bag. It's a bit thicker than the other brown paper I'm using. I'm painting that front and back with glue and then folding it a couple times to thicken up the edge. I'll wrap that onto the wolf's upper jaw to make his top lip, then repeat to make the bottom lip. I'll use some smaller bits of brown paper to blend the torn edge into the rest of the sculpture. I'm going to use a little bit of air dry clay to sculpt his wolfy little nose. I'm using DOS brand clay here. It has a lot of paper fiber in it, so you could stick it to the paper mache with white glue. This won't work with every brand of air dry clay, but you can find this one in my supply list in the description. After sticking the lump of clay to his snout, I'm using a sculpting tool to sculpt some little nostrils in there. With that done, we'll let him dry overnight. Here he is dry. I'm going to use these buttons to make his eyes. These are also linked in my supply list. I'm just using some side cutters to cut the shank off of each button. Next, I'm hot gluing each eye onto his face, and you might be thinking, Jane, these are pretty crooked. Don't worry, I will figure that out eventually, but it's going to take me a minute. I wanted to experiment with a different way to make fur. I've used faux fur on a few of these monster projects, but maybe you don't want to use faux fur. So I've cut out all of these folded cardboard kite or diamond shapes. They're different sizes and angles. I'm hot gluing these onto the sides of his face. Here's the first little cluster of them. I think this is looking pretty good, so I'm continuing all the way around. Here's how it looks with all of them done. I'm pretty happy with this new fur technique we've just unlocked here. It's a tiny bit of a pain covering all those little spikes with paper mache, but it's really not that bad. I got all those spikes covered, and then it's this shot here that made me realize just how crooked those eyes are. Holy moly, that's bad. So we'll pry those off and take another stab at it. Next, I'm going to use some brown paper to try to make eyelids. But the paper isn't doing what I want it to, so I'm switching to paper towel, which is a little more flexible. I'm liking these a little better, so we'll move on to some paper towel upper eyelids. Blend in the eyelids with some smaller bits of brown paper. I thought some ridges on his nose could make him look a little less like a good dog and a little more monstrous, so I made some bumps with some glue-soaked paper towel. I also considered giving him a big brow wrinkle, but I didn't like how that looked, so I scrapped it. I'm covering the nose bumps in paper mache and setting him aside to dry. After I'd walked away for a bit, I came back and had a look at him while he was drying, and it hit me that the top of his head needed to come up a bit, so I made this brow piece with a bit of aluminum foil and added that to his head. I paper mache'd over that, of course. Then I thought I might try that brow bump again. I think it looks better now and definitely makes him look more monstrous, so we're rolling with it and covering that in paper mache too. I also remembered here that I'd planned to put a shirt on this guy. It's an easy way to indicate that this guy is half man, not all wolf, so I'm using another long piece of that paper grocery bag to make his shirt collar. Okay, now we're really gonna let this guy dry one last time before paint. We're gonna start painting this guy with an all-over base coat of matte black. Now, of course, I've decided to make my life a really difficult, and I've decided I'm gonna paint his shirt in a buffalo check. So I mapped out the pattern and taped off all of the solid black squares. Now, the red paint I want to use for most of the check isn't very opaque, so I'm mixing it with some gesso and putting that lovely pink color on his shirt. When the pink is dry, I'm going back in with the straight red paint, and it's really nice and vibrant. When the red is dry, I'm peeling off all my little tape squares and touching up the black. Now this was the point where I started to question my choices because I had to hand paint all these little lines of the check, but by the time I've got this much done, I know it's going to be worth it. And here it is all done, looking fabulous. From there, I looked at a reference image of a gray wolf and used a dry brush paint technique to paint all the wolfy markings on my guy's face. Finally, I put a little bit of glossy Mod Podge on his nose, and then, as always, I glued some black felt onto the bottom of the sculpture as a final finishing touch. And here's our finished werewolf. Let me know what you think of him in the comments. This guy definitely took me longer than most of the other monsters in this series. I got a little bogged down in the details of the open jaw and the cardboard fur texture, and of course that buffalo check. But it's all good, we learned a few new things along the way. Give this video a like if you think I did a good job on him. If you think I did a bad job, tell me what you would have done differently in the comments. I've got one more monster left in this series. I was working on him a bit today and he's already looking pretty spooky, so you're not going to want to miss that video. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel. Share and type this video if you want to show me some extra love. I always appreciate it. Again, thanks so much for watching and I'll see you tomorrow.